I used to believe my family name was a shield, something that would always protect me, even when love and approval were withheld. Growing up as a Blackwell in Philadelphia meant carrying both privilege and expectation, but it also meant living in the shadow of my father's cold eyes and endless criticism. I thought his contempt was rooted in my choices in my career and the fact that I did not follow the path my brothers had. I never imagined the truth would be so much more shattering, that the very blood running through my veins was the reason for his hatred. It was only 3 days after my grandmother Eleanor's funeral when everything cracked. The mansion still smelled faintly of lilies from the service the heavy drapes pulled against the gray autumn light. I had gone into her study, a place of comfort where I used to sit at her desk and listen to her stories when my father stormed in. His face was red with rage, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're not even her real granddaughter," he spat, his words burning into me. "Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune." For a moment I could not move. My body went rigid, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself ask, "What are you talking about?" He sneered, pacing across the rug, his shadow looming over grandmother's portrait above the fireplace. "Don't play innocent, Jennifer. Your mother's little secret isn't a secret anymore. Once the lawyer confirms you've got no Blackwell blood, you'll get nothing." Nothing. A word that rang in my ears like a curse. For 27 years I had lived as his daughter, carrying his name, suffering his disapproval. Now with a single revelation he was casting me out, rewriting my life, as if I were nothing more than an imposter. "My name is Jennifer Blackwell," I whispered to myself, as if clinging to that identity could keep me whole. But even as I said it, doubt coiled inside me. If Douglas Blackwell wasn't my father, then who was? I had always felt like an outsider in this family, tolerated more than embraced. My brothers Thomas and William fit perfectly into my father's mold, driven, ambitious, successful in ways that earned his nods of approval. I was different. I had chosen history and art preservation of the past rather than building empires for the future. I thought that was why I never measured up. But maybe it was something deeper, something my father had always known, but never said aloud until grief loosened his tongue. I left his presence, shaking, my mind whirling. I ran my fingers across the polished wood of grandmother's desk, remembering her last words to me. "Trust your instincts, Jennifer. Not everything is as it appears." At the time, I thought it was the rambling of an old woman near the end of her days. Now I wondered if she had been trying to prepare me. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my mother. "We need to talk about your father tonight. Alone." My chest tightened. Whatever truth awaited me, I was certain my world would never look the same again. That night, in a quiet cafe tucked away from the city's watchful eyes, I sat across from my mother. She looked smaller, diminished by sorrow, her usually impeccable hair and makeup softened by sleepless nights. She twisted her wedding band nervously as she spoke. "Your father shouldn't have told you like that," she said, her voice trembling. "It was cruel." "So it's true." My voice cracked. "He's not my biological father." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "It's complicated, Jennifer. More complicated than Douglas makes it sound." And then the story unraveled. Before she ever married Douglas, she had loved James Douglas's younger brother, my uncle. They had been young, passionate, dreaming of a life together, until James left for a research fellowship in Seattle. Distance pulled them apart, and in that vulnerable time she turned to Douglas. It was brief, a mistake she regretted, because her heart still belonged to James. When she discovered she was pregnant, she knew the truth: James was the father. But Douglas insisted otherwise. He proposed offering the stability she thought she needed for her child. That child was me. The world shifted under me as my mother's confession poured out. Every memory rearranged itself. My father's coldness, my Uncle James's warmth during rare visits, my grandmother's special affection for me. It all made sense now. But why reveal this secret now? Why weaponize it against me just days after my grandmother's death? My mother's expression hardened. "Because of the will. He's terrified Eleanor left you something significant. He wants to discredit you before the reading." I gripped her hand across the table, my mind spinning. "So what am I then?" "You are a Blackwell," she said firmly. "Just not Douglas's daughter. You're James's, Eleanor's granddaughter by blood." The irony struck me like lightning. My father, no Douglas, was trying to cut me out of the inheritance by insisting on bloodlines. But if bloodlines were what mattered, then I was more legitimate than he was willing to admit. I drove to James's apartment the next morning, my stomach in knots. He greeted me with the same gentle smile I remembered from childhood, his dark eyes mirroring my own. When I asked him the unthinkable if he could be my father, he froze, his teacup trembling in his hand. He listened as I explained, as I told him of Douglas's cruelty, of my mother's confession. His face shifted with recognition, nostalgia, and a quiet hope. "We need to know for certain," he said. "A DNA test." And so we did. In a sterile lab, we handed over our samples, our futures hanging on cotton swabs, and scientific analysis. The results would come in 3 days, just before the will reading. I left the lab with my heart racing. Whatever truth awaited me, one thing was already certain: I would no longer allow Douglas Blackwell to write my story. The 3 days waiting for the DNA results felt like an eternity. Each hour dragged like lead, every moment filled with restless questions and memories reshaping themselves under the weight of this new truth. I kept replaying my father's words. "You're not even her real granddaughter," but the venom in his tone no longer stung the same way. Now it sounded more like desperation than authority. At night, I couldn't sleep. I would sit at my grandmother Eleanor's desk, running my hands over the carvings along the edges, remembering how she would tell me stories about the family's past, tales of resilience and reinvention. "Blood is important," she once said, "but character is everything." I wondered if she had known, if she had loved me more fiercely, because I carried James's blood instead of Douglas's. On the morning of the results, James called me. His voice was unsteady, but there was a warmth there that steadied my nerves. "Jennifer," he said softly, "I have the results. Can you come over?" When I arrived, he was waiting at the kitchen table, the envelope in his hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he pushed it toward me. My fingers trembled as I opened it, scanning the page, until my eyes landed on the words that changed everything: 99.97% probability of biological relation. I gasped, covering my mouth as tears filled my eyes. James reached for my hand, his own trembling. "I always felt it," he whispered. "When you were little, when you'd run to me at family gatherings, there was something unspoken between us. Now we know." Relief and grief warred inside me. Relief that the truth was out, grief that it had been hidden from me for so long. All these years I murmured I thought I was nothing to him, that his cruelty was somehow my fault. James's jaw tightened. "Douglas has always been a bitter man, but now his bitterness has no foundation. You are Eleanor's granddaughter, my daughter. He cannot erase that." The timing of the results was almost poetic. 2 days before the will reading, Douglas was still strutting around, certain that he had cornered me into silence. But I had the truth in my hands, and for once I held the power. The night before the reading, I sat with my mother. She looked exhausted, worn down by years of Douglas's dominance, but when I showed her the paper, her eyes shone with tears. "I should have told you long ago," she whispered. "I was afraid of what Douglas would do, afraid of breaking this family apart." "Mom," I said firmly, "he was never a family to me. Not in the way James has been, not in the way Eleanor was. You protected me in the only way you knew how. Now it's my turn to protect myself." The morning of the will reading, the Blackwell mansion was filled with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Lawyers, relatives, even distant cousins crowded into the wood-paneled study where Eleanor's portrait watched over us. Douglas stood tall, his sons Thomas and William flanking him like soldiers. His smirk widened when I entered, as though he already saw me defeated. The lawyer began reading the will, his voice calm and precise. Bequests of jewelry, small sums, and family heirlooms passed to various relatives. Then came the heart of it, the estate itself, the Blackwell fortune, the properties Eleanor had meticulously maintained. "To my beloved granddaughter, Jennifer Blackwell." The room froze, all eyes turned to me. Douglas's smirk faltered, his face tightening. "I leave the main residence, the accompanying grounds, and the trust established for its preservation." Gasps filled the room. My brothers exchanged shocked looks. My mother covered her mouth, and Douglas erupted. "She's not her granddaughter," he thundered, slamming his fist on the table. She's not a Blackwell by blood. The lawyer held up a hand calmly. Mr. Blackwell Eleanor's will is clear. She named Jennifer specifically. Bloodline is not a legal requirement when the testator explicitly identifies the beneficiary. Douglas's face turned crimson. He spun toward me, fury blazing in his eyes. You conniving little... But I was ready. I reached into my bag and pulled out the DNA results, laying them flat on the table for everyone to see. The room gasped again as the words stared back at them, 99.97% probability. She is a Blackwell by blood, James said firmly, stepping forward. His voice rang with quiet authority. She is my daughter. Eleanor knew it, and she chose to honor it. The silence that followed was electric. Douglas's fury collapsed into shock, then something uglier, fear. Because in that moment, every lie he had told, every attempt to erase me had crumbled. I sat taller, my voice calm but firm. You told me I was nothing, that I didn't belong. But the truth is, I belonged more than you ever wanted to admit. Grandmother saw me, she trusted me, and now so will everyone else. The lawyer cleared his throat, continuing with the formalities, but the energy in the room had already shifted. My mother's tears flowed freely, James's eyes shone with pride, and Douglas. Douglas sat back in his chair, defeated for the first time in his life. As the reading concluded, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about inheritance. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about identity. For years I had lived under the shadow of a man who despised me. Now I was stepping into the light of truth, carrying the name Eleanor had wanted me to bear, carrying the bloodline that no one could erase. I walked out of that mansion with the papers in my hands, my head high, my heart still trembling, but stronger than ever. And I knew this was only the beginning of reclaiming everything Douglas had tried to take from me. Walking out of the mansion that day felt surreal. The air was crisp, autumn leaves crunching beneath my heels, yet my body trembled as though I had walked through fire. The weight of the DNA results in my purse was both anchor and liberation. For the first time in years, I was no longer cowering beneath Douglas's judgment. I was standing on truth. James walked beside me, his presence steady, his silence saying more than words could. When we reached my car, he touched my shoulder gently. Jennifer, no matter what happens next, you're not alone anymore. His words filled a void I hadn't realized was so deep. For years I had felt like a daughter with no father, no true ally in my family. Now I had found both in him. But if I thought Douglas would simply accept defeat, I was naive. The following week, whispers spread through the Blackwell circles. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called me, some out of curiosity, others dripping with false concern. We heard about the will, one cousin drawled over the phone. Quite the surprise, isn't it? You, of all people. Her words stung, but I cut her short. I didn't need validation from those who had always seen me as less. The real storm came when Douglas filed a legal challenge against the will. He claimed Eleanor had been coerced, that she wasn't of sound mind when she signed it. It was laughable. My grandmother had been sharper at 80 than most people are at 40, but it was enough to drag us back into court. Caroline, the lawyer who had represented me during my first battles with Douglas, agreed to take the case. Sitting across from her in her office, I laid out everything. He'll never stop, I said, my voice thick with both anger and weariness. Even when the truth is clear, he finds another lie to twist. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes fierce. That's what men like Douglas do. But the law is on your side, and so am I. The question is, are you ready for another fight? I nodded, even though my stomach clenched. I've been fighting him my whole life. This time I want to win. Court was brutal. Douglas sat across from me, his glare like a knife. His lawyer spinning tales about Eleanor being too frail, too easily influenced by me and James. They painted me as manipulative, as someone who had preyed on an old woman's grief. Every lie was another stone hurled at me, and though Caroline countered each one with calm precision, my heart ached with rage. Then came the testimony. James spoke first, his voice steady, recalling Eleanor's clarity in her final months. She knew exactly what she wanted, he said firmly. She wanted Jennifer to inherit because she trusted her, because she loved her. His words rang through the courtroom like a bell. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, my legs shaking. I spoke of my grandmother's letters, Her encouragement the nights we spent discussing the history of the family, her insistence that character mattered more than titles. I told the court how she had once taken my hand and whispered, "You see things the others don't. That's why this house will be yours one day." Douglas's lawyer scoffed, but I saw the flicker in the judge's eyes. The truth was resonating. Finally, Caroline revealed something we hadn't expected: to use Eleanor's personal journal, which James had found tucked away in a drawer. In neat handwriting my grandmother had written just months before her death, "Jennifer is my legacy. She carries the spirit of this family. No one else understands it the way she does." The courtroom fell silent. Douglas's face drained of color. His lawyer shuffled papers pointlessly, but the damage was done. The judge ruled in my favor, upholding the will entirely. Every claim Douglas made crumbled under the weight of evidence, under the undeniable truth of Eleanor's words. As we left the courthouse, flashes from reporters' cameras blinded me, but I kept walking, James at my side. My mother waited outside, tears streaming down her face. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "She'd be so proud of you." That night, I walked through Eleanor's mansion alone. The house was mine now, but it felt like more than bricks and chandeliers. It felt like vindication. I stood in the study staring at her portrait and whispered, "I'll honor this grandmother. I'll honor you." But as I turned out the light, I knew Douglas's hatred hadn't been extinguished. Men like him don't fade quietly, they plot, they simmer. And though the battle had been won, the war for my place in this family was far from over. I wandered the halls of the mansion late into the night, the silence pressing around me like a heavy cloak. Each room whispered of Eleanor, her taste in art, her insistence on preserving history, her stubborn refusal to modernize too much. The chandeliers glittered as though keeping vigil, while portraits of stern ancestors gazed down, silent judges of this new chapter. For the first time, I felt both the weight of inheritance and the strange freedom it carried. But peace was short-lived. 2 mornings later, I woke to a flurry of messages on my phone. Headlines screamed across financial and social news sites. Blackwell patriarch disputes will claims. Daughter illegitimate. My picture, taken without permission outside the courthouse, was plastered under those words. The comments beneath were worse strangers dissecting my life, speculating about my mother's choices, calling me a fraud. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I scrolled. "He's poisoning the world against me," I muttered. My mother, sitting across from me, reached over and covered my hand. "Douglas has always relied on control through shame. Don't give him that power." But it was hard not to. Everywhere I turned, whispers followed. At the market, in the neighborhood, even among colleagues at the museum where I worked part-time. Some offered sympathy, others just stared. The house might have been mine, but it felt like I was under siege. James came to visit that evening. He looked weary, his shoulders slumped as though he had carried my burden all day alongside his own. "Douglas has friends in the media," he said quietly. "He's trying to destroy your credibility because he can't touch the inheritance anymore." I felt anger ignite in my chest. "Let him try. I have the truth. I have proof. He can't erase DNA." James studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's exactly the fire Eleanor had. She faced scandals too when she was young, but she never bowed." Hearing that steadied me. The next blow came a week later in the form of an anonymous letter slipped under the mansion's door. The handwriting was messy, but the words were deliberate. "Leave the house. The fortune isn't yours. Stop pretending." My stomach churned as I read it, bile rising in my throat. It was signed with nothing, but I knew the hand behind it. Douglas. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls with a candle, every creak of the floorboards making me flinch. Was I truly safe here, or was the house itself a battlefield? In the days that followed, small sabotages appeared. Papers on Eleanor's desk rearranged. A door left unlocked when I knew I had secured it. A vase toppled in the foyer, shards scattered like a warning. Caroline suggested I install cameras, and I did, though it felt like desecrating the home's old-world charm. But I had to. Protection was no longer optional. Then came the unexpected twist. While sorting through Eleanor's personal files, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in her hand. My heart pounded as I slid it open. Inside was a letter dated only weeks before her death. "Dearest Jennifer, If you are reading this, it means the truth about your father can no longer be hidden. I want you to know I always knew. From the moment you were born, I saw James in your eyes, and I loved you even more fiercely for it. Do not fear Douglas's cruelty. He has lived his whole life grasping at power that was never truly his. The future of this family, the true spirit of it, belongs with you. Guard it well, trust James, and trust yourself. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely. For all the battles, all the accusations here was the proof of what I had always longed for: acceptance, belonging, love. The next court session, because Douglas wasn't finished, felt different. This time I walked in not as the girl he had belittled for decades, but as the granddaughter Eleanor had chosen. The daughter James acknowledged the woman she had entrusted with the family's legacy. Douglas blustered, his lawyer spun lies, but nothing could pierce the shield of that letter. I read it aloud in court, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. Silence fell over the room, thick and undeniable. Even the judge seemed moved, his gavel striking with finality. Douglas's petition was denied, again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "How do you feel?" they shouted. For the first time, I didn't shrink back. I looked into their cameras and said, "The truth always outlives the lies." That night back at the mansion, I stood in the study under Eleanor's portrait and whispered, "I hope I made you proud." In the flicker of candlelight, her painted eyes seemed almost alive, watching me with approval. But even in victory, I sensed it. The storm was not yet over. Douglas's fury had not burned out. It had only grown darker, waiting for the moment to strike again. The mansion became both sanctuary and prison. By day, sunlight poured through the tall windows, gilding the parquet floors and draping the rooms in Eleanor's lingering presence. By night, the silence pressed against me, and every shadow felt like Douglas's gaze. I slept lightly, waking at the smallest sound, always checking on the locked doors, the cameras Caroline had insisted upon. Leo, the little boy from the daycare in another life. No, here it was James, my true father, who tried to reassure me. He would stop by in the evenings bringing tea, sometimes dinner, sometimes only his steady company. "You're not alone," he reminded me. And yet, even with his presence, I felt the old ache of isolation. Years of Douglas's scorn had trained me to expect abandonment, to brace for the moment people turned away. One afternoon, while organizing Eleanor's papers in the library, I discovered something that sent a chill through me. Tucked between ledgers and letters was a small black notebook, the pages filled with Eleanor's precise handwriting. At first, it seemed like a list of house expenses, but as I read on, I realized it was a record. Quiet notes about Douglas's dealings. Unexplained withdrawals, property transfers to shell companies, hints of accounts overseas. My pulse quickened. Caroline's words echoed in my mind. "Men like Douglas don't fade, they scheme." This notebook was proof. Proof not just of his cruelty toward me, but of the rot that had festered in the Blackwell fortune for years. That night, I sat in the study with the journal open before me, the fire casting long shadows. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice: "Guard it well. Trust yourself." My hands trembled, but a seed of resolve had been planted. Douglas had tried to erase me, to strip me of identity and inheritance, but perhaps Eleanor had left me not just the house, but the weapon to dismantle him completely. The next day, I took the notebook to Caroline. She flipped through the pages, her brows furrowing deeper with every line. Finally, she closed it and looked at me gravely. "Jennifer, this isn't just family drama. These are crimes. If this is accurate, Douglas could face federal charges for fraud and tax evasion." I swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Her eyes sharpened. "We prepare. Quietly. If we move too soon, he'll bury the evidence. But if we move carefully, we can make sure justice finally catches up with him." For weeks, we built the case. Caroline brought in forensic accountants, discreet investigators. Every evening, I would light a candle in the study and pore over Eleanor's notes, piecing together the puzzle of Douglas's empire of lies. Each discovery was both devastating and empowering proof of the rot I had always sensed, but could never name. Douglas, meanwhile, escalated his war in the public eye. Anonymous op-eds questioned my character. Online forums buzzed with speculation. At one point, a brick was thrown at the mansion's gate, shattering against the iron bars. I clutched Eleanor's letter that night, whispering her words like a prayer. Trust yourself. And then the day came. Caroline filed the case, submitting the evidence to federal authorities. Within a week, investigators arrived at Douglas's estate. News broke across every major channel: Blackwell patriarch under investigation for fraud. The empire he had built on intimidation and deceit began to crumble. I watched the coverage from Eleanor's study, my hands shaking. There he was, my so-called father, being led out of his home in handcuffs. His face was pale, drawn no trace of the fury he had once wielded like a weapon. For years he had called me illegitimate, unworthy, nothing. Now the world saw him for what he was. James came to stand beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You did this," he said softly. "Eleanor gave you the truth, but you were the one brave enough to use it." Tears blurred my vision. I just wanted to belong. "You do," he said firmly, "not because of what you inherited, but because of who you are." That night, for the first time, the mansion felt like home. The shadows still lingered, but they no longer felt like threats. They felt like guardians, the weight of history standing with me instead of against me. But even as I breathed relief, I knew the story wasn't over. Douglas's trial loomed, and with it the chance for him to drag me once more into the fire. Only this time, I wasn't the frightened girl clutching at scraps of identity. I was the woman Eleanor believed I could be. The months leading up to Douglas's trial stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Every headline, every whisper in the city's upper circles carried his name, and by extension mine. Blackwell heiress, exposes patriarch. Some painted me as brave, others as conniving. I tried not to read the comments, but sometimes I couldn't help it. The cruelest voices sounded too much like Douglas's, mocking me, questioning whether I truly belonged. But each time doubt began to take root, I would return to Eleanor's study, open her letter, and let her words steady me. "The future of this family belongs with you." That reminder became my anchor. Caroline prepared me for the trial with relentless precision. "Douglas's lawyer will try to drag you through the mud," she warned. "They'll question your legitimacy, your motives, your character. You must stand firm. Don't let his lies define you again." I nodded, though fear gnawed at me. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was afraid of being swallowed once more by his rage. The day of the trial, I walked into the courthouse with James on one side and Caroline on the other. Reporters swarmed, cameras, flashing voices, shouting questions. I held my head high, though my hands trembled inside my coat pockets. Inside, Douglas sat at the defendant's table. He looked smaller than I remembered, his once commanding presence diminished, but the glint of malice in his eyes was unchanged. When his gaze locked with mine, I felt the old chill, but I didn't look away. Not this time. The prosecution laid out their case with brutal clarity: offshore accounts, shell companies, tax evasion schemes spanning decades. Eleanor's notebook became a cornerstone of evidence, her meticulous records impossible to refute. As page after page was presented, I felt her presence in the room, as though she were testifying alongside us. Then came my turn on the stand. My pulse hammered in my ears as I swore the oath and sat before the judge and jury. Douglas's lawyer wasted no time. "Miss Blackwell," he began, his tone dripping with disdain, "isn't it true you only came forward with these allegations after you were granted a substantial inheritance?" I steadied my voice. "It's true that Eleanor entrusted me with her estate, but it's also true she entrusted me with the truth. I didn't fabricate evidence, she documented it herself." He pressed harder, asking about my parentage, my mother's choices, even hinting at scandal between Eleanor and James. Each question was a dagger meant to humiliate. But I remembered Caroline's advice: don't let his lies define you. So I answered calmly, firmly. "My identity doesn't change the facts. Fraud is fraud. Lies are lies. Douglas built his empire on both, and now the truth is here." For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in Douglas's eyes. James testified next, his voice steady, recounting Eleanor's trust in me, his own knowledge of Douglas's corruption. My mother spoke too, her voice shaking but resolute, admitting the truth of my birth and the years of silence born of fear. Her courage, after so long under Douglas's control, filled me with pride. When Douglas finally took the stand, he unraveled. He ranted about betrayal, about being disrespected, about me being nothing but a mistake. His words, once weapons, now sounded pathetic, bitter echoes of a man stripped of his illusions of power. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Guilty on multiple counts, Douglas Blackwell, once untouchable patriarch, was sentenced to years in prison. The gavel's strike rang like thunder, final and undeniable. I sat frozen, tears streaming silently down my face. James squeezed my hand, his eyes shining. "It's over," he whispered. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. That night, I walked alone through the mansion's halls, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and history. I paused before Eleanor's portrait, her wise eyes gazing down at me. "I did it," I whispered. "Not just for me, but for you, for James, for every truth you guarded." The house felt lighter then, as though its walls had exhaled at last. I curled up in the study with a blanket, Eleanor's letter beside me, and for the first time in years I slept without fear. Because I finally understood Douglas had tried to cut me out of my grandmother's will, out of the family, out of existence. But he failed. I had reclaimed my place not through inheritance but through courage. And courage, unlike wealth, could never be stolen. If you've stayed with me through this journey, I hope my story gives you strength. Don't let anyone rewrite your worth. Hold on to your truth, even when the world tries to strip it away. Please like, share, and subscribe, so more voices like mine can be heard, and share your own story in the comments, because your truth matters too.